Hello, everybody. So today we have another fanfic review, and I have to say off the bat, this is one of the best fanfics I've ever read. This person is at a very high level in terms of writing, and this could very easily be a good novel if it was published formally. But I digress. So we're going to be looking at Gorthauro Estel, and I probably butchered the pronunciation of it, but it is what it is. So this is a Silmarillion fanfic that takes place after the War of Wrath. Now, I'm just going to say at the outset, I haven't read the Silmarillion. I know a bit about Tolkien's Legendarium and the stuff outside of Lord of the Rings, but not a ton. Enough to be able to follow this and make sense of it. Which is a point in this fic's favor, because it can be very easy to do something with all the like esoteric abstract stuff that you get in Tolkien's universe outside of Lord of the Rings, to like just get really confused and lost and just make everything an obscure reference to something. But this does a good job of balancing it for people who kind of know what's going on with not explaining things too much. Not so much that it would give the plot away, but just that it could get bogged down in unnecessary detail. At any rate, so the fanfic takes place in the aftermath of the War of Wrath, where Sauron decides to surrender and return to Valinor to face judgments for his deeds. And as I said, this is very, very well written, because it does a good job of making Sauron very sympathetic, but not detracting from his evil, if that makes sense. Like, as you go through the story, all of Sauron's thoughts and actions, it makes sense. They're logical within the context, but it doesn't make him look like a good person, and it doesn't really justify any of the things he's done. And I think that's a very difficult path to kind of walk when you're writing a villain, is I think there's a temptation to just make them completely misunderstood, to make them, oh, it was entirely the fault of the people he was rebelling against. Sauron's actually the good guy. The Valar are actually evil. I think it's very easy to write it that way, and this is not written that way. There are a lot of points where you kind of resent the Valar, but it's not because they seem evil. It's because you're looking at it from Sauron's perspective, and you can understand his kind of frustration and anger at them. I think the author does a really good job of capturing and expanding upon Sauron's character. So it starts off with Sauron surrendering. Now, in this context, it's not so much that he feels any remorse for the things he did or what he did was wrong. He just kind of used the writing on the wall, and he basically says, I'm going to eventually be defeated no matter what. He ponders what he did in canon. Like, he says, I could just go hide in Middle-earth until all the Valar's armies leave and then try to rebuild. But he's like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life hiding in a hole somewhere, and they'd probably send some j.r.r. to drag me back to Valinor eventually. So I might as well go on my own terms and try to take advantage of whatever offer of clemency that they're going to give me. And so even though Sauron's gone back for what the Valar assume, well, at least some of them assume, is his desire for redemption, his personality hasn't changed an immense amount. He's still very prideful, very bitter. He still thinks about revenge frequently. He still kind of misses the life that he left behind. And like I said, it does a really good job, I think, of portraying things from Sauron's perspective. Like, you can understand why Valinor is really boring. You can understand why a lot of the elves didn't want to go back, because it's like this utopian society that's really perfect, but nothing ever changes. There's nothing to explore. There's no danger. There's nothing really that interesting to do there. And I can see why a lot of the elves just preferred the unpredictability, the struggles of Middle-earth, the fact that it was this much bigger, untamed world. And Sauron, is like horrible as his previous life was in a lot of cases, he had duties, he had responsibilities, people respected him, people feared him. He's a j.r.r. lord. It's in his nature to want to command, to want to lead, and having to leave that all behind. And as bad as like the place he used to live in, I forget its name, Morgoth City, it was his home for a long period of time, and Valinor is not his home. I'm not sure if he was even. I don't understand the exact chronology, but I don't think he was even there when it was in its current form. So anyway, so Sauron reaches Valinor, and he's immediately taken to be judged by the Valar. And we get a really kind of cool judgment scene. We see the Valar very much from Sauron's perspective in this. So while a lot of them are very kind and just, Sauron sees them as being very naive and stupid. Like he thinks that if he was in their place, that he would have just cast him into the void and not taken a chance on him, or just bound his powers and kept him in a dungeon till the end of the world. But the Valar feel that they kind of owe him because he came there under the threat of parley, under the offer of parley. So they decide that they're gonna give him another chance. So the task they ascribe to him is he's gonna have to work at a quarry for an indefinite amount of time, cutting and shaping limestone blocks to be sent to Middle Earth to help rebuild elven houses. And Sauron immediately feels extremely betrayed because he feels this kind of work is beneath him as a Maya, and that there's all kinds of other stuff he should be doing. Particularly, his hope was that he could just go back to being a smith and just have a quiet life there. And he figures that was like the most he could hope for, and that he could kind of be satisfied at that, because making things is basically the only thing he still has. He still kind of draws pleasure from that. In his character in this is that he didn't like the stuff he had to make under Melkor. Well, he enjoyed making the stuff, but he would prefer to go back to making jewelry and gemstones and that sort of thing. And there is a scene where he forges the One Ring. Well, it's not actually the One Ring, but he forges a plain gold ring that he starts wearing. He hasn't infused it with power or anything like that, but it is kind of the only part of the story we see Sauron as being happy is when he's doing some smithing on his own time again. But yeah, so he feels betrayed because the Valar are like, you're gonna have to go and do like crappy manual labor, and Sauron's like, why did I even come back? I mean, they're not casting me into the void, but I'm basically gonna have to toil doing work that I find beneath me. And in truth, it kind of is beneath someone of his intelligence and skills, and the fact that he's a Maiar and not a elf or a human. For an indefinite amount of time, I should have just stayed, and I should have just fought it out. And you can really understand his perspective. Once again, you do get a lot of counter perspective in this, where a lot of the elves and some of the Valar who aren't sympathetic towards him frequently bring up his crimes. And Sauron doesn't even really attempt to deny these. He has a lot of flashbacks. It's pretty clear in this that he's suffering from severe PTSD. He has a lot of unpleasant memories of Morgoth and just the horrific things that he saw and done. But to a certain extent, he feels that it was just kind of the natural order of things, that he's a Maiar, he's a god, and the elves are just there to serve him and to do his bidding, and that he's a direct instrument of Eru's will. So as part of the judgment, as part of the judgment that's placed upon Sauron, they strip away his powers. They permanently remove the powers that Morgoth gave him, the sorcery and whatever other natural enhancements he's had, but they also seal away his natural Maya powers as a smith and as a fire spirit, and they force him to remain in one form for the duration of his time in Valinor. So Sauron, being Sauron, basically makes the hottest, sexiest body that he possibly can. It decides that he's going to keep himself in that for the duration there. So hopefully he can leverage that to kind of get what he wants. And he's not really sure at this point what he wants, but eventually what he decides is he's going to work with the Valar. He's going to serve his sentence to get his powers back, and then when he gets the opportunity, he's going to get revenge on everybody. Even if he can't take over Valinor, he's going to do something to strike back at the people who he feels have wronged him. And once again, this is logical within his perspective. Obviously, in the overall moral sense, the Valar probably should have punished him more. And a lot of the people get really angry about the fact that he wasn't punished deeper, but I do enjoy it a lot from that perspective. So he's then given the opportunity to go to one of the Valar's halls. So Yule, once again, I'm not super familiar with the Valar, but from my understanding, he's the smith or creator Valar who made the dwarves. Really wants him back because he views Myron, or I guess Sauron, as he's now known, as his basically son figure, and he really just wants him back, and he wants things to go back to the way they are. And he's just kind of the only person in the story who's 100% on Sauron's side and makes excuses for him. His wife really, really hates Sauron, and they get into a lot of fights over it. But yeah, so Sauron goes back to the halls of Yule, and as I said, you can really see why Sauron resents his position. Like when he goes there, he sees the Maya and the elves treating each other as equals. He tries to command an elf in a very public fashion and mocks the Valar for not putting the elves in their place. And once again, it is kind of understandable, not just from the environment he's from, but to kind of assume that as a Maya, he has a natural responsibility or a natural privilege to command the lesser beings. And I can understand why someone would not like the level of familiarity that he's been being treated for what is, to a certain extent, objectively lesser creatures than himself. So one of his plans when he gets there is he wants to forage a object using external power, that he's going to put external powers into, that will give him some facsimile of his previous abilities back. And that's kind of where we're heading towards with the idea of creating the One Ring. I don't know if his plan is to trick Yule into putting some of his power into it. But like I said, fairly early on, he goes to one of the forages in the middle of the night and forages a gold ring for himself. But even that he finds very bittersweet because his powers were taken away from him. So even though he is the most skilled being in creation, probably other than Yule, when it comes to creating jewelry and objects in general, he doesn't have the ability to control flames. He doesn't have his magic. He can't make things supernaturally great. He can make basically perfect natural objects, but not perfect supernatural objects like he used to be able to. And so we see Sauron just very sullen, not wanting to interact with the elves or really anyone else. Yule is a very kind being and tries constantly to reach out to him. He's convinced, though, that this is all like some op by the Valar to get him to screw up or to torture him. He doesn't view this as a thing of redemption. He doesn't really view himself as needing redemption. He just views this like as a pure prison sentence that he just has to serve out, because if he hadn't have done this, they would have cast him out into the void with his master. Something I like about this is I'm not completely done where the author's up to. It's not, the story's not finished, and it probably won't be finished in the foreseeable future. But there's some good cameos. Like Saruman makes an appearance as the Maya who replaced Sauron as Yule's right-hand man and the master of the forges. And in typical Saruman fashion, he like just ridicules Sauron and talks about how what a loser he is now. Radagast also makes an appearance. I understand they have different Maya names, but it's hard to keep all these like unfamiliar names straight. So he makes an appearance as well. And it's just kind of cool to see these cameos, because from my understanding of the timeline, the wizards weren't sent to Middle Earth until Sauron started to rebuild, and they were kind of sent there to take him down. But since Sauron's not staying in Middle Earth, the Astari, I think that's what they're called, never needed to go there, so they stay in Valinor. And Radagast is a much simpler and nicer person, whereas Saruman's very envious and kind of a dick. The scene where they interact is kind of funny, because Saruman's making something in one of the forages, and Sauron walks up and just starts explaining everything he's doing wrong and how he could make it better. And it just really pisses Saruman off, because he's still inferior to Sauron, and he'll probably never become better than him when it comes to smithing and that sort of thing. So where I'm at in the story at the moment is it's been decided that Sauron's going to get a rotation where a day or two a month he's going to go and visit the other Valar, and they're going to try to help him get better. And I just got through his first day at the quarry, and it is, like I said, really boring work that he feels is beneath him, and understandably so. But I'm really interested to see where the story goes. Let me just see what chapter I'm at. So there is currently 19 chapters. This is very long. I'm currently on chapter 14. And we are already seeing some changes in Sauron. He hasn't really gotten any better as a person, but he has gotten a bit more mentally stable. And he's kind of decided on his multi-year 4D chess plan to try to get out of the current situation he's in. So overall, I'd say this is an extremely well-written story. I think it's a really good exploration of Sauron's character. I think it does a good job, once again, of portraying him sympathetically and portraying things from his perspective, but not lessening how much of an asshole he is and not lessening how bad a person he is. But like I said, it is pretty easy, I think, and largely justifiably so, to just look at bad guys as not being human, or to look at villains as not being human. Like, there's a point where Enwi, I think Inui, whatever the Herald's name is, I'll just call him the Herald, is like, some of us care about people other than themselves, and Sauron says, I did care about people other than myself. You killed all of them when you destroyed my home. And that's probably a lie. He probably didn't actually care about anyone. But it is an interesting perspective. There's like a picture of Middle-earth, and Sauron gazes at it a lot and feels homesick. Because once again, as terrible and horrific as the other stuff was, it was home. And we do get a lot of flashbacks to Melkor torturing him and trying to make him in kind of the man, or I guess the Maiar that he is now. So overall, I gotta say, really enjoying the story. I highly recommended it. Highly recommend it, and there'll be a link to it down below. So I hope you guys enjoyed. More awesome quality content to come, and I'll talk to you guys later.